Hello and welcome to the Shotgun Sportsman, a podcast about handgun hunting brought to you by Handgun Hunters International. My name is Ryan Hoover and I'm your host. I believe handgun hunting is the most rewarding way to hunt, and it's something I want to share with as many people as I can. If you are at all interested in getting your own game meat, I want to challenge you to a way of hunting that is good for both your spirit and your body, so you can become the confident, self-reliant person you were meant to be. Okay, on today's episode, we have a really good one for you. One of my very good longtime friends, Dr. Bill Jones, sat down with me for an interview about wilderness survival and just preparedness in general. Bill is a former Navy SEAL, and he is also an emergency medicine doctor and a wilderness ultrasound fellow. And he is a wealth of knowledge, as you can imagine, on medical issues as well as mental preparedness and basically just everything that has to do with facing hard things, as you can imagine a SEAL/doctor would be. Anyway, I really enjoyed my conversation with him, and I think you're going to find it interesting. If you like this podcast, I'd ask that you please give us a 5-star review, share it, comment, give us all the plaudits you can, because that really helps the algorithm. And as you know, in this world, that's what it's all about, to get our message out there. So please, again, if you like the Shotgun Sportsman, give us a 5-star review and share it with your friends. Thank you so much, and listen in as I discuss wilderness survival and emergencies in the woods with Dr. Bill Jones. Dr. Bill Jones, thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So obviously your experience has taken you all over the world and into some adventures, as well as learning a lot about the human body and emergency situations. So I was interested to talk to you today about some preparedness in the field that hunters can undertake, as well as maybe what to do in some of the more common emergency situations. So let's just start out with kind of what you do these days.
So today I'm an emergency medicine physician, and I am a wilderness medicine fellow. So I study for emergency medicine in the austere environment.
Oh, okay. So hikers in trouble.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then what is the kind of prevalence, do you think, of underpreparedness? Like people who go into the backcountry, do you think that most of them are usually prepared and know what they're getting themselves into? Or do you think that most people go unprepared, or is it evenly mixed?
I would have to say it's probably evenly mixed. A lot of people that have a lot of experience are usually prepared, but there are always stories about people that have a ton of experience and still have bad stuff happen because they were unprepared. But with how popular outdoor activities has gotten, especially since COVID lockdown, I think the amount of people going out that have less experience and are completely and utterly unprepared has really gone up.
So there's probably two ends to the spectrum, and one is that you can be completely unprepared. Obviously, that's bad, but you can be so prepared and so experienced that you get complacent.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that in the terms of the COVID lockdown stuff. Okay, so if you're going out hunting in a camping backcountry type situation, like you said, an austere environment, what are some of the things that you're going to make sure that you know before you go? And we'll get to the things that you make sure you take later, but what are the things that you make sure you need to know? What knowledge do you need to have, or skills?
So I think the biggest thing would be to know the area that you're going into. Where are access points? Where's ways to get out? Are there any ranger stations in the vicinity? Any nearby towns? Anything like that could potentially be of help? What kind of resources are available in that area? So if you do have an emergency, can somebody come and get you? And who would that be?
And what are those likely response organizations, like park rangers or?
Park rangers have some. There's a lot of EMS groups that will do that as well. And you would have to just do a little bit of research for the area that you're at and you can typically find it.
I was watching something about avalanche beacons. Like when people get buried with an avalanche, they have that little beacon that people can home in on and find them. Is there anything like that for normal, just like a beacon that some means for signaling electronically for someone to come find you?
Yes, there is. Garmin makes one. It's called, I believe it's called InReach. And it's basically a GPS device that sends a like SOS signal out.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And that's on the gearless like top things to have. Yeah. There's a few other companies that make something very similar, but yeah, like you're talking about the avalanche beacon, like that's only good for a couple hundred meters at most. It's not designed for going out and then having somebody find you miles down the road. That's where the GPS would be better.
Gotcha. Understood. And as far as, there's a level of woodcraft, the Eagle Scout type of knowledge that some of it, is fun, like starting a fire with as few implements as possible, which every man and boy loves to try and do. But, these days it's not likely that you're going to have to start a fire by rubbing two sticks together. So basically my question is, what are some of the most important woodcraft knowledge things that you should figure out or learn before you head into those? I mean, it depends, obviously, like snowy area, forested area, what time of year it is and all that stuff. But in general, what do you think?
I think the most important things are to be able to craft some sort of shelter in whatever type of environment you're in, whether that be snow or not snow. And then how to collect and clean water so that you can have drinking water.
Have you used those or seen those, like the little UV stir sticks that they put in water? Is that effective?
Yeah, those are very effective.
Okay, so
it has to be completely clear water for it to work.
Okay.
So if it's murky water, the UV rays don't get everywhere.
Understood.
And so you would have to strain it like through a bandana or something like that first.
Oh, that's a top tip. Okay, so then just for fun, because you're a doctor, what are some of the things that you can contract by drinking bad water?
Various many bacteria and worms.
Oh yeah, parasites.
Thank you. That's the word. Yeah. Parasites.
I'm a doctor too. Okay. What is the likelihood that that's a fatal?
So if you are stuck somewhere and you contract one of these, and it could cause such profound vomiting and diarrhea that you would become severely dehydrated.
Yeah. All right. So there's PSA. Clean your water, folks. Okay. So shelter and water. Great. Okay. So now let's talk about kit. What are some of the things that you're going to make sure that you have from a preparedness standpoint? Not necessarily like, obviously, we know you're going to bring your gun, you're going to bring your tent.
So preparedness, I think, like we already mentioned, one of the top things is a GPS device that can send out a signal to enact a rescue if you need it, such as the Garmin InReach. Then always have a little bit of extra food, a little bit of extra water, super important. Have a way to be able to clean water, and then have extra warm clothes specifically if you're going somewhere where it's going to be cold at night, especially if it's a day trip, like you're going out for a day hike and you're supposed to come back, and it gets cold at night, but it's fine during the day, and you get stuck out and you have to spend the night out there. Have something to where you won't freeze to death if that happens.
That's interesting. That's a good point because I have heard plenty of stories of people getting in trouble because they were perfectly prepared for the thing that they thought they were going to be doing, like a day trip.
Yes.
But then they get stranded and they're not prepared for the whatever happens when they were there longer than they thought they were going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to look at not only that day, what's the night like, and then what's the incoming weather for the next couple days.
Right.
And then as far as like medical supplies, I think the most important thing that you would carry would be a tourniquet.
Okay, so in your first aid kit, tourniquet, obviously, what are some other items that you want? If we're backpacking, we want to keep it light, so we're not going to bring the whole kitchen sink. But what are the top items that you always want to have? That the layman, not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For med kit, I would have tweezers because super uncomfortable to have a thorn.
True.
And it's something that's pretty light and is very effective. I would have a bandage of some sort.
Right. Like a cloth bandage? Like an ACE type thing?
Like an ACE or the Coban, like the self-adhesive
right.
wraps.
Like after you get your blood drawn type deal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those are pretty useful because they could provide a little more pressure than an ACE bandage typically can. And some sort of gauze to stop the bleeding, and then Band-Aids and some sort of antiseptic like alcohol wipes. That'll take care of most things that you're going to run into in a field experience like that you can do yourself.
How important is it? I mean, I know it's not essential, but how do you recommend going with more than one person?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you got your field kit and you're in the woods. What are some of that you know of? What are some of the most common injuries and ways that people get injured when they are hiking, camping, hunting in these situations?
Most common is like trauma, like tripping and falling, and then having some sort of injury from that. Broken bone, scratches, scrapes, a head injury. Those are the most common. When you're hunting and you involve firearms, there's always the risk of a gunshot wound happening. Sure. And so being able to at least manage some of that would be essential.
Yeah, and actually this is, I was telling you this story yesterday. We have an HHI member who was a couple podcasts ago who was shot when he was in the woods. Fortunately, he's also a doctor, but it was one of those things. He was in a place, I believe it was public land. He didn't hear the shot. He said it felt like a rib burning and it was in his bicep. And so the gunshot wound, if you're on public land, it could be just such a fluke that not even you are responsible for, It's super rare, obviously. But okay, so then let's say you're walking on a trail, shale or whatever, slips out from under you, you take a tumble down the hill and you land and you're still conscious and you could tell you're hurt. What are the first things you need to do to self-assess the extent of your injuries?
I think just look around and physically look at your body, especially in the moment of adrenaline. You might not realize that you have some injury.
Gotcha.
And so actually like feeling around and looking and making sure that you don't have like a compound fracture with the bone sticking out. Right.
Yeah. I've thank God never experienced it, but I've heard people who describe horrific injuries as it didn't even hurt. And then I look down. And so is it true that with the adrenaline running through your body that things like excessive bleeding can happen more quickly than you realize that they're happening and get out of control? Yeah,
100%. Okay. And especially, like you said, cuts, whereas if you just look, you can see it. You have kids, so how many times are they fine until they look down and then they see that there's blood and then they start freaking out and screaming?
That's true. That's a good point. Okay, so, most of the stories that I've heard are similar. Fell down a ravine or whatever, broke an ankle or wrist or something like that. So obviously, let's start at the upper part. If your legs are fine, you can walk.
If you can walk out in a wilderness medicine scenario, that is 100% the best option.
Okay. And so let's just say that you sustained an injury to your shoulder, your arm, your wrist, or something like that. How are you going to deal with that in the field? Let's say you have your med kit on you first, and then say that you lost it in the second scenario.
Okay. So, assessing, are you bleeding?
Right.
And if you're bleeding, stop the bleeding however you need to, whether that just be some direct pressure or the gauze and the Coban that you have, or a tourniquet if it's really bad. And then can you move it around? And so really your goal would be stop the bleeding and then sling your arm so that you could then walk out.
Okay. That brings to mind another question. How do you tell when you need a tourniquet?
You would need a tourniquet when you're trying to stop the blood, it's just not working.
Oh, okay.
Or you could tell that it's like an arterial bleed,
Okay.
which would be more like a squirting than just oozing.
Gotcha.
But it's really hard to tell how much blood you've lost, especially like out in the field, because, it gets absorbed, soaks in, and not that much blood can look like a lot of blood.
Right.
And vice versa. And so it's hard to tell, like, oh, I've lost this much blood, I should do a tourniquet. It's really about how is it responding to your initial treatments.
I understand.
And also it's a time thing too. Like if you have multiple injuries or multiple people, that takes 20 seconds to put on a tourniquet.
Gotcha.
And you can just get that on and then deal with the rest and then come back to that later. So it's useful also in like a triage scenario too.
I gotcha.
And not just triaging of multiple patients, like triaging of multiple injuries.
Understood. And how long do you have once you've put a tourniquet on?
The old adage of like 4 hours, but you have a choice to make of, do you leave it on and maybe lose the limb because the tourniquet's been on too long and the tissue past that has died, or do you bleed out? And so if it's one or the other, obviously you're going to choose to live. And if you get back to a tertiary center that has surgery and all that stuff, you can have a tourniquet on for a pretty prolonged period of time and they can save it still.
Oh, interesting. And like everything, as technology progresses, outcomes improve. Interesting. Okay, so assess your injury, stop the bleeding. If you think you have a break or a really bad soft tissue injury, you're going to sling it and just try to get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
What if the injury is to one of your legs?
Same thing initially, right? Check for bleeding, stop the bleeding, see if you see any breaks. You lift up half your leg and the other half doesn't come. Probably have a broken bone.
Right. Yes.
And then, can you put any weight on it?
Okay. All right.
Right. So, can I put some weight on it to where I kind of hobble out, or I need a stick, or my buddy who's with me can then help me? Is it both legs? Is it one leg? Because that changes too.
Yeah, right.
Because if it's one leg, you can still walk out.
Right.
You get a stick or whatever, or your buddy does, you put your arm over your buddy and then you hobble out. And that's still usually way faster than getting any kind of rescue to you.
So that's what you're saying is, if you are any level of ambulatory, get yourself out, because it is going to be much more likely for you to get aid quickly by you going to them than them trying to find you.
Yes.
There was a story that we put in the Six Gunner not too long ago about a guy who actually was rifle hunting in California, and there was like an arroyo or whatever, and he fell down it and ended up breaking his wrist or his ankle. I think it was his ankle, because I remember he tried to use his rifle as a crutch, and
use what you have.
Exactly right. More of a cane than a crutch. But nobody knew where he was, and he, even though he was near a bike trail and he was trying to signal people by shooting, letting them, like 3 shots in succession so they could stop and look, he had a very difficult time signaling somebody. So that's a good example of, if you can get out, then...
And it's not always get out, right? It'd be get to that trail.
Right.
Get to where somebody can then help you. But I guess something we should talk about too, if you do have a broken bone, is about splinting. So if you're splinting, you want to put support above and below the fracture point. And so you use a stick, whatever you have, a handgun.
Yeah, right.
And then you tie it to your arm or your leg at a point above and below where that fracture is.
So the stick or whatever is parallel to your bone.
Yeah.
Do you use one thing or two things?
Two things better.
Okay.
One thing also works.
Is it
all that it's really doing is stabilizing it, so it doesn't move around while you're moving.
Understood. Yeah. Because you don't want that to shift. It makes it harder to heal later, right?
It hurts more.
Okay.
It's more for pain. Your broken bone, if it's shifting, once you get to...
they'll reset.
Yeah, they'll reset it. And so that really doesn't matter. But it's very painful when you're trying to hobble out, and every time you shift, it's moving and rubbing, and it hurts.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because, a lot of times people would think, oh, it hurts, but you're like, well, yeah, duh, it hurts. You just got to grit through the pain and get the heck out of there. So to what degree, because, in these situations, as you are very familiar with, this becomes sometimes, even if you're having severe injury, this becomes more of a mental game than a physical game.
Yeah.
So how important is it to, now obviously you're not going to be comfortable, like staying at the Hilton comfortable, but how important is it to take the time to prevent pain so that your mental stamina as you're moving out increases?
Very important. You'll be far more successful if you take as much suck out of it as you can.
Yeah.
Obviously people can do pretty extraordinary things under very bad circumstances, but if you don't have to, why?
Right.
And so, like, things you can do to make yourself more comfortable: take some Tylenol. Something as simple as that, right? But that really helps with pain control. And then immobilizing a fracture so it's not moving around while you move.
Right.
Just very, very helpful.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear you say, because, I kind of feel like sometimes it would have just been like, well, you just got to grit your teeth. I had some Tylenol, but I didn't take it,
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say that you have fallen down but you don't feel like anything's broken. How do you assess yourself for a head injury, like a concussion or something like that?
Yeah, so that's very, very difficult to do.
Right.
Because if you do have a concussion, you can't assess yourself because you can't remember.
Understood. Yeah.
So you can't really do it. That's why it's super important to have a buddy there with you. Concussions, though, they really are inconvenient and they hurt, and you'll have a bad headache for a very long time, but it's not really life-threatening unless you don't have a partner and you are too altered to be able to recognize that you need help and to be able to get help. And so really the big things you're worried about is if you hit your head so hard that you're bleeding inside of your head.
Right.
Which unfortunately there's not much you could do out in the field for that, except just kind of watch your buddy to see if they're getting worse and worse and worse.
Gotcha. So if you know that you hit your head, would it be a good idea to just assume you do have a concussion? I mean,
not necessarily.
Okay.
Right. The worst concussions that I have that come into the ER, they will ask you the same question like 157 times, just over and over again. And they'll be about a minute like, what happened? You were in a car wreck. Oh, okay. What happened? You were in a car wreck. Oh, okay.
Wow.
And they forget, and they just can't like cognitively assess what's going on. Right. And so, if you hit your head, you're like, oh, wow, that kind of hurt a little bit, but I'm okay. I know where I am. I know the year. I know what's going on. You probably don't have at least a bad concussion. You can still have a mild concussion.
So if you do have a buddy, or you are the buddy, how do you check to make sure your buddy does or doesn't have a concussion?
For the purposes of being there and just buddy aid, just recognizing like, hey, do you know who you are? Do you know where you are? Who am I? Like those kinds of questions, and then seeing if they're asking the same questions again and again and again. Because if they are, that's definitely bad enough that would warrant leaving.
Gotcha. I've heard that you can do check to see if their pupils are unequally dilated. Is that a symptom?
That is not a symptom of concussion. That is a late symptom of a head bleed, and they are doing very, very poor at that time. Okay,
so it's way worse.
Yes.
Gotcha. And what about if their eyes are sluggish to dilate?
Many different things can cause that, and so that's not a great tool, especially for like somebody who doesn't look at pupils all the time.
A pro,
right? Yeah. So, that's kind of sluggish, I guess.
Right.
Like what's the definition of sluggish?
Okay,
and so that's not a good.
I'm glad I asked that question, because I've always thought, just shine a light in someone's eyes, and if it doesn't dilate or if it doesn't work right, But you're saying a better way to assess concussion specifically is just monitoring and asking questions that are so basic that they should definitely know the answer to.
And then if they do have a pupil that is unequal, they are bad. You need to call for like help immediately. Because that what happens is they have so much blood where it's not supposed to be in the brain that it's pushing their brain down, compressing the oculomotor nerve. That is causing that to happen. Okay. And so you are like, it's so much that it's pushing.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on to the thoracic region. I'm Dr. 2. moving on to the torso area and assessing internal injuries there. I know you mentioned you being a wilderness fellow, and there's been some really cool, we've talked about advancements in sonogram technology where you guys can have these little portable ones you go in the field, which enable you to tell whether or not someone has an internal bleed or something like that. That might mean that while they don't look the most injured, they're the most priority case. So obviously we're not all carrying little sonograms on our phones. I'm sure that there will be someday where we can just be like, send you a video. But what are some ways for you to self-assess internal injuries besides the head?
There's not. Unfortunately, especially without some more advanced equipment. Mm-hmm. Not even that advanced, but like a stethoscope or like the ultrasound device or knowledge. There's not much that you can do to assess.
Okay. So then as far as that's concerned, because, you've heard those stories about people who, didn't know because they look okay, but they have some internal, usually it's a bleed, right? Mm-hmm. And when they bleed out inside because they weren't really, really aware of it until it was too late. I know like you're at really late stage of that, you can feel a firmness in the belly. Isn't that true? Like if it's like really getting really hard.
Yeah. But also that's until you're, feeling a bunch of bellies and then like, which one's hard or not.
Okay. So then what's your best advice for someone? I mean, what kind of things are going to cause internal bleeding and what should you look at?
So any kind of blunt trauma or penetrating trauma, obviously, of course, blunt trauma is a really big culprit because you could cause lacerations on your spleen, your liver, kidneys, and bleed internally. And it's really hard to pick that up without a CT scan.
Gotcha. So like you fall and then the proverbial log across the way that your stomach lands on, and just kind of that kind of deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then same like hitting your chest so hard that you can bleed inside your chest too. Or rupture a lung and have air inside your chest. Right.
So is there ever likely to be a time where you've sustained this kind of injury, but you think you're okay? Or is it going to be so bad that you're...
Potentially, yeah. Okay. It could be a slow bleed. And it just bleeds a little bit. But if it's bleeding slow enough, hopefully it stops itself before anything happens.
Gotcha.
Not all the bleeding of internal injuries requires surgery.
Oh, I didn't know that. Does blood coagulate inside you? Because it's a chemical process, right? I didn't know that. What about exposure type injuries?
Those are very common. Obviously, wind burns, sun, cold. And if you're at high altitudes, like the UV burns on your eyes too. And so just having proper equipment for that, whether it's sunscreen, proper sunglasses, like, you see the videos of the people at high altitudes, they have those big, dark sunglasses. It's specifically because if you don't have that, you will burn your eyes.
Makes sense though.
Yeah.
Because you don't have as much filtering of the atmosphere.
Yeah. Most of those are inconvenient. Like windburn or sunburn, it's inconvenient. It's irritation. Obviously, if you get really sunburned, it can lead to dehydration, further problems down the road. But the big one that you want to worry about is cold exposure, frostbite. Right. Because that's very bad. Lose limbs, fingers, toes, noses.
And is there let's talk about when you're at cold exposure, is there, what are the symptoms like? Because obviously cold will slow all your processes down, so you just become lethargic, right? And
that's more like hypothermia.
Okay.
Which of course is
Right.
is a cold exposure. But yeah, you go through a process where you become cold, then you start shivering, and then you stop shivering.
And if you stop shivering, that's bad news.
Yeah. That is when you are very cold at that point.
Okay. So if somebody, let's say, fell in an icy river or something like that, is the old, like, I think most people would know, I would hope, I don't know if most people know anymore, get your wet clothes off, build a fire, is that, or cuddle with your buddy or whatever?
Get warm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, get the wet clothes off because that's not going to help. And then get warm.
What about like heat stroke type? So that's kind of like, for me, I think of it as if you stop shivering, right? Or not that you stopped. If you've gone past shivering, then you're super cold and it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
And the opposite end, I think, like if you've stopped sweating or if you've gone
Also
past
bad.
sweating,
Yeah.
very dangerous.
Yeah.
And what are, I don't know, what are the symptoms of, what are the heat, exhaustion, and then heat stroke?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the symptoms of, how does that progress?
So it's basically where your body can no longer regulate its own heat. So you stop sweating, and a lot of times you have some pretty bad electrolyte imbalances with it, like low salt because you've sweat all of it out.
Right.
And so that kind of confounds the picture of what's going on. But you just become like very confused, very altered, and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
So again, all of these things we've talked about, it sounds to me like your chances of survival or even just better outcomes increase exponentially by having a partner with you.
100%.
Yeah.
Talking about hypothermia, there was this really interesting case. It was in a European country, maybe Norway, but there was an orthopedic surgeon, and she was out with a bunch of partners, and they were doing Nordic skiing, and she fell into a river, and actually, I don't remember all the details, but got her head stuck under the water, and so also drowned.
Oh wow, yeah.
But was hypothermic, got incredibly cold, and she was, essentially dead for like 6 hours.
Wow.
But had full neurological recovery and is still a practicing physician now.
Is that because of the low temperature?
It's because of the low temperature.
That's like Mr. Burns cryo freezing his head. Whoa, that's wild.
Yeah.
Man. So like she went under the ice or something like that? Sounds
Yeah.
like, yeah. Jeez. Okay, so what are some tips? Obviously, you have been in many situations in your life that required extreme mental toughness. What are some tips you have? Because, unfortunately, that's not the norm. I think that men especially, but all modern Americans on the whole are probably less tough mentally than we were 100 years ago, and whatever that means. What are some tips that you would give to people for mental preparedness before they go on adventures like this?
I think the biggest tip is, you always prepare for the worst. And so if you're preparing for the worst, it's that old saying, like, plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Right? And so anything that gets thrown at you is not really that big of a deal. It's just kind of like, oh, well, this stinks. It happened, but we were planning for this, so we're good. Let's enact the plan. And then I think once something does go wrong, setting small goals. And so it's not I just need to make it 7 miles back to base camp or to my vehicle to be able to get out. It's, okay, I need to make it to this ridge line. I need to make it to this trail. And you kind of break it up into these goals. And so it's achievable goals, and you're actually finding success along the way instead of just not having success until the very end. And that's very helpful for like a positive mental outcome and outlook. And when it starts to become really hard, you can say, well, I just made these last 3. I can do this. and you keep going.
It's kind of good advice in general about life, whether or not you're trying to just get through your work day or you're trying to walk out on a broken leg.
Yeah, small goals are huge for everything, because you actually find success.
In the toughest mental situations that you've been in your life, was that the method you used to get through them? Would you say?
Often, yeah.
Yeah. If I can just get to this point,
yeah,
and then I'll assess from there and get to the next point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just got to make it to this.
Yeah.
And then you're done. Like, okay, now I just got to make it to this.
Gotcha. That's fantastic advice. Okay, lastly, I wanted to touch on this a little bit because I know you're really good at it, and this is one of your sticking points with other people who are in this wilderness medicine space and rescue and going out, and that is map reading and knowing where you are and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, when you talk about that, because these days we have lots of apps, Onyx, that kind of thing, that are very handy. But still, if you look at them, yeah, they're digital, but if you know how to read a map, I would think that you're much better, like, even with those things. So when you say map reading is what you're talking about, is that what you said? What does that mean?
Well, I said orienteering.
Orienteering.
Yeah.
That was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
So what does orienteering mean? What are the specific skills for that?
Orienteering is map and compass.
Okay.
And so it's having a map, finding where you are on the map using your compass and land features, and then finding where you need to go from that point using your compass and your pace count to count your distance, and also use landmarks along the way to get to that point.
Okay. This is a topographical map.
Yes.
That, you typically see the military guys gathered around in the movies looking at. But,
and I think an essential piece of gear is always a map and a compass.
Oh, a physical paper map.
Physical paper map and compass, because let's say you have your phone and you're using your CalTopo map on your phone, or Gaia GPS map on your phone, and you fall and you break your leg, but you also broke your phone because your phone was right there in your pocket. Now you have nothing, and you can't even use the compass on your phone anymore.
Yeah.
But if you have a physical compass, you can know where to go. For people that get lost, that are lost without any equipment and compasses, they've studied like what they do, and they find like the point of where they get lost, and then they're like, oh, well, I'm going to go this way, and they end up walking big circles. Because as good as you think your internal compass is, it's not. Right. And so, especially when you're walking around land features, if you're on the side of a hill, you're always going to walk down a little bit. So you're not going to walk straight. The sun moves. Right. So, or I guess the sun doesn't move. The earth is moving.
Right. And depending on where you are and what hemisphere is not going to trace a straight line across the sky and all that. Yeah.
So it's difficult, but if you have a compass and I just need to go north, and you can continually just go north, you're far better off.
Where do people learn how to do that? I mean, not military people.
I know that REI has courses that you can sign up for.
Okay.
Or you could go to my course at www.
We do need to make a course.
We should.
We definitely do need to make a course. Okay, so one question I have about that is because everybody, when they're talking about backpacking and stuff like that, the old adage that ounces are pounds type of deal. And I hear you saying that a paper map and a compass are important enough to add to those pounds. How much, just because I've never done it, how much space fits on a map? Like your typical map that you're talking about taking with you, how big of space does that cover?
It depends. It depends on the scale of the map. Right.
Yeah. But the one you would want to take.
So I use CalTopo, and I can make the map for the area that I'm looking at. Okay. And so I can make it on a sheet of paper.
Gotcha.
And if I'm covering a big area, you obviously need more of a map.
Okay.
But how much detail do you need? Because if you need less detail, you can cover more space on it. Right. But if you need more detail because you're trying to find specific areas, then you're not going to have as much space on it.
So then, this is just now me being curious. So let's just say you're going in Colorado or wherever you're going hunting, and everybody's got honey holes up there, and they're just like, you need to go to. I mean, if a buddy is going to tell you where a good place is, it's like you need to find the place. There's a bowl with a tank and 4 giant trees, next to it. One of them
in an X shape.
Yeah, and like a pirate bar, like a wet bar. But anyway, and you want to find that right on X or whatever, those maps that you can zoom in, GPS, satellite stuff. Yeah. That might be the way to find that, but then maybe carry a map with less detail but covers more space in case you need to move further.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like I said, as long as your phone is still working, like those are really fantastic. Those are really good and really useful.
And now you can even download them so you don't have to have a connection.
Yeah. Very, very useful. But what happens when you're got weathered in and you're out for 2 days and now your battery's out, or you do fall and you break it.
Yeah.
But then also that's where GPS comes into play as well, because GPS are usually more rugged than your phone is.
Right.
And you would typically have it in a separate area than your phone, and you wouldn't have it on the whole time.
Right.
Like kind of pull it out for emergency
I gotcha.
type things. But then also, stuff can happen to any equipment.
Yeah.
Stuff can happen to a compass too.
Right.
But if your phone, your GPS, and your compass breaks, you were meant to die. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah. Everything's going against you anyway. Okay, so finishing up, what pieces of advice in general we've gone over to review? We've gone over the kit that you should bring with you, and your top things are tourniquet, compass, map. And in your med kit, you need to make sure you have a bandage, gauze. You need to, maybe some pain pills, stuff like that.
Band-Aids, clean, like simple scrapes and stuff that are just inconvenient, but are nice when you have something for it.
You need to have the knowledge and equipment to be able to construct a shelter in whatever area you're going into. You need to have a way to obtain and then clean water, because you're far more likely. You can't go as long without water as you can without food.
Yes.
And then if you do get hurt, stay calm, take the time to assess yourself. Hopefully you're with somebody who can help you.
And hopefully you have the GPS where you can send an SOS if you need to.
The GPS where you can send an SOS. And then if you are in a tricky situation, even any situation, mentally just try to do the next right thing. Make it to the next step, to the next step, to the next step.
Yeah.
On top of that, is there any advice that you would give anyone going into the woods?
I just want to quickly cover what to do if you are lost and you have nothing.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you went out on a day hike, Shenandoah Valley, and you got lost, and you don't have a compass. You don't know where you are. You don't really have any equipment. The best thing to do is hopefully you've told somebody where you're going,
right? Yeah,
and they are expecting you back, because that's when the bad things happen, is when no one knows where you are, where you went, or when you're supposed to be back, and so then it's like 7 days later, and they're like, hey, I haven't heard from so and so in a while, and then it takes forever, right? But if you told somebody you're out on this hike and you get lost, just stay where you are. Just stay put.
Oh.
Because unless you're 100% sure that you can find where you need to go, but we talked about that, right? If you don't have a compass, a lot of people walk circles.
Right.
And it's very hard for search and rescue to find a moving target versus stationary target. Yeah. And then you can also, if you're in one place, you can start doing things to prepare for a little bit of a lengthier stay. Building a shelter, finding water, building a fire so you could signal, all those things.
That is good, and that's probably counterintuitive to most people.
It is, because you think I need to go here. I could always walk a straight line.
Right.
Nope.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Just hunting out where we hunt,
it's easy to get turned around.
There's no way that I could walk a straight line.
Yeah.
Even when we try.
And like you mentioned, we know where we are, and it's still, you got to wait a second and kind of regain your bearings.
Exactly. That's an excellent point. And then you brought up another one that we didn't talk about, but it is never go into the woods without telling somebody.
Yes,
because
that's the
foolish.
Primary thing, right?
Man. Yeah, because I can imagine, a story about a family goes on a hike and then they turn around, they can't find one of their kids, so the dad goes off, and like maybe he's down this way. The dad gets totally lost. Fortunately, somebody, the kid makes his way back because he was just goofing off.
And then the dad dies.
The dad's like, where?
Yeah.
He gets lost, but yeah. Okay, so any last tips for anybody going into the woods?
Enjoy yourself.
That's a great one. Thanks for doing this with me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
You're great.
Thank you.
I love you, dude. Another good one in the record books. Now, that was very interesting to me, even though he and I are very close and I know I get to speak with him a lot. It was interesting to hear some of his perspective on those things and some of the things that you don't think about. One of the things that really impacted me was the fact that if you get lost in the woods, to stay still. As confident outdoorsmen, a lot of times our tendency would be to think, I can do that. I can walk in a direct line east. I can find my way back, when the truth is that statistically you are way more likely to be rescued if you just keep put. That was a brutal reminder to me about my own capabilities in the woods. And next time you're in the woods, try and see if you can walk a straight line. Bring a compass and walk a straight line and see if you're facing the way you think you are. You'll be pretty surprised. Anyway, I do need to say that none of this podcast constitutes medical advice from either Handgun Hunters International, myself, or Dr. Jones. So if you need medical advice on any of these topics, please consult your medical practitioner. Again, thank you so much for listening to The Shotgun Sportsman. Give us 5 stars, and we'll see you on the next one. This podcast is produced by Handgun Hunters International. HHI is the only organization dedicated solely to supporting and growing the sport of handgun hunting. Membership gets you access to our great, well-moderated forum where friendly handgun hunters of all experience levels share stories and information from folks that have actual experience in our sport. We also host giveaways to our members of guns, gear, and ammo every month, and each prize is worth several times what membership costs. In addition to this podcast, we publish a free digital magazine, The Six Gunner, which is written exclusively by HHI members. If you are a handgun hunter or support handgun hunting in any way, you need to be a member of HHI. Join today at handgunhuntersinternational.com. Again, if you have any questions on how to get started in handgun hunting, please reach out to me at ryan@handgunhuntersinternational.com. If you think we deserve it, please leave us a 5-star review, and don't forget to follow Handgun Hunters International on social media at Handgun Hunters INT. God bless and good hunting.